Today we are covering 7 major stories. The Supreme Court keeps mifepristone access in place for now. A federal judge blocks key parts of a Texas Senate bill number 4. President Trump and President Xi wrap up Beijing talks with a calmer language, but major tensions unresolved. Russia and Ukraine exchange prisoners while attacks continue. A Boeing 737 MAX crash family wins a $4.95 million verdict. Parents and school districts clash over classroom screens and student privacy. Also, the National Weather Service is warning about fire weather and severe storm risks across the parts of central United States. And we will close out today's segment with the 5 Diamond Group Real Estate and Mortgage Update. Hello, my name is Jared, and this is the Spectrum for Friday, May 15th. The goal here is that we provide fact-first, human-centered news briefings, and the goal here is simple. We don't just report what happened, we also understand why it matters for ordinary people. And we take the spin, and we remove the spin and the framing and really just put it into everything that's been distracting us and apply it to real-world consequences. So let's begin. The Supreme Court is keeping mifepristone access by telehealth and mail in place for now. This is not a final ruling on abortion access. It is a decision that preserves the current access pathway while a legal challenge continues. The court kept in place access to mifepristone through telehealth and mail, while a challenge to FDA rules continues in the lower courts. That matters because a lower court ruling would have restricted mail delivery and telehealth options for millions of people. Not only those who would be affected, but it would also affect those states with abortion bans. For patients, this means access does not change overnight. And for providers and pharmacies, it means that the current system remains in place. But the legal uncertainty continues. What is confirmed so far is this. We know that mifepristone access, the Supreme Court allowed mifepristone access to continue for now, and the case against the FDA is still ongoing. And the court has not yet issued a final merits decision on the underlying rules. Now, what is not confirmed is how the lower courts will ultimately rule. It's also just unclear as to whether the case will return to the Supreme Court later for a full decision. The coverage and gap here is important to note, because if you're receiving most of this information from right-of-center news sources or anti-abortion focused coverage, you might hear it framed mainly as courts blocking a safe attempt to restrict abortion. And that can underplay the practical disruption that a nationwide mail restriction would create for patients, providers, pharmacies, and telehealth systems. Now, these reports are in no way any sort of endorsement pro or for. Our goal here is neutral perspective. And speaking of the facts, my personal opinions on any of these subjects have no relevance to the reporting on here. So that means if you're also receiving the information, let's say from left of center coverage, you may hear it framed mainly as a reproductive rights win. And that can underplay the fact that this is temporary. It does not permanently settle the FDA question. The concern is that legal uncertainty can become a daily life barrier even before access formally changes. For a patient, that uncertainty means calling multiple providers, checking whether a prescription can still be mailed, arranging childcare, or taking time off work for an appointment that might not have been necessary under the telehealth rules. If a lower court upholds the FDA rules, mail and telehealth access become more stable. If a lower court narrows the rules, patients and providers could face another round of rapid changes. If you are affected by this care, or if your clinic or someone that you work with or even in your family are affected by these changes, Consider sharing your experience in the comments below. Or you can like and subscribe and get notifications when we go live, and share with us your comments in the live chat. See, the legal debate here is always abstract until the people that are actually living it are heard. A federal judge has blocked key parts of the Texas Senate Bill 4. This is the Texas immigration law that would have expanded state authority to arrest and deport people suspected of illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. U.S. District Judge David Ezra issued a preliminary injunction blocking key provisions of the law. The ruling came just before parts of the law were set to take effect. Civil rights groups say the order blocks provisions dealing with reentry crimes, state-issued deportation orders, or failure to comply with those orders. It also covered prosecutions even when a person had a pending immigration case. The legal issue is whether Texas can create its own immigration enforcement system, or whether that power belongs to the federal government. So, what is confirmed? Well, we know that the judge has blocked key provisions in that court order, and the court has found that those provisions conflict with federal immigration law. The case will likely continue through the appeals process. What is not yet confirmed, though, is how quickly Texas will appeal, whether a higher court will step in, and what part of the law may still be enforced. The coverage you receive on this subject really matters, because if you're receiving this story from a right of center or far right sources, you might hear it framed mainly as a court stopping Texas from securing the border. And that framing can distract from the due process and the federal authority question, the question being, who has the legal power to order removal? And then what happens to people with pending cases or even lawful status issues? It doesn't stop there. There are a series of questions to follow through on. Now, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, you listen to left of center sources, you might hear this framed mainly as a civil rights victory. And of course, that framing can underplay the local government's problem that many communities still face, such as the question which rule applies and how should public agencies respond. The concern here is that immigration policy, especially uncertain immigration policy, that can turn into a routine life. It can take routine life into a life of managing risks. For example, let's say you're a family in Texas. The daily life consequences might mean something to the effect of choosing who drives to work, or who takes the children to school, or whether you are able to even attend a medical appointment simply because you're fearful around law enforcement. For people with pending immigration cases, the administrative burden is even harder. It includes a massive amount of documentation, carrying them, calling attorneys, missing shifts so that you can attend hearings, paying for copies, translations, transportation. The key factor is if the higher courts side with Texas, more states might test their own immigration enforcement systems. Now on the other end of the spectrum, if higher courts side with the plaintiffs, federal control over immigration enforcement is reinforced the way it has been structured. Local uncertainty, of course, at this point will still prevail. And for those living in that area, if this affects your household, if you are living under these changes, whether it's in your home, your workplace, your school, your community, please consider sharing what that uncertainty looks like. You don't have to tell us the exact situations for your protection, but let us know how you're managing it, and maybe we can come up with ways to help provide solutions. You can also like, subscribe, and get notified when we go live so that we can have that conversation live in the future. And the reason is this: the policy debate is louder than the everyday reality for families who are simply trying to get through a normal week. The world is changing, and we need to be prepared with how to be able to help others as opposed to fighting others. President Trump and President Xi have wrapped talks up in Beijing. The public tone was calmer, but the major tensions were left unresolved. Two leaders discussed trade, tariffs, rare earth minerals, artificial intelligence, agricultural, technology, Taiwan, and wider security concerns. President Trump described the relationship as being in a good place, but China's President Xi also warned against foreign interference over Taiwan. U.S. officials have discussed the possibility of a government-to-government board of trade that could handle some economic disputes outside of the national security lane. The important thing to understand is this. Calmer language can reduce market anxiety, but it does not erase the structural competition between the U.S. and China. That matters because these talks can affect prices. It can affect farm exports, shipping costs, electronic car prices, energy supply chains. All of these have an impact on the decision as well as the conversation that is coming out of Beijing. Not to mention supply chain planning. And as we've experienced through COVID, any alteration in any one of these areas can create a compounding challenge for us. So what do we know so far? Well, we know that what is confirmed is that these leaders have met and they've pushed to stabilize the relationship with trade, rare earths, tariffs, AI technology, agricultural security concerns, and they've considered a board of trade to help manage some of this. Taiwan still remains a sensitive dispute, with Xi warning against foreign interference. And both countries are still trying to manage competition without letting it become an open crisis. What is not yet confirmed, though, is whether China will announce major purchases of U.S. products, whether tariff relief will become permanent, or whether any new trade structure will have any sort of authority. So if you are catching this news story from different outlets, you might consider what's the messaging that's being portrayed here. Well, if you're on the right of center, you might hear it framed as proof that hard bargaining and tariffs are creating leverage. And that can distract from the costs that tariffs and uncertainty might shift, how it shifts into consumers, importers, farmers, and manufacturers. If you commonly listen to the left of center coverage, you might hear it framed as unstable, personality-driven diplomacy. And that can distract from long-term structural reality that U.S. China competition will continue no matter who has the calmer press conference. The concern here is that trade conflict becomes household cost pressure long before most people can see the cause. For families, the ripple can show up as high prices for electronics, appliances, cars, home repairs, and delivery fees. For farmers and manufacturers, uncertainty can mean delayed orders, missed export windows, or weaker confidence to hire. If the talks create a repeatable channel for disputes, supply chains might become a little more predictable. But if the talks produce only optimistic language, companies may still raise prices or delay decisions because the risk has not actually had any sort of change. So the practical question for us is, for whom is this good news and for whom is it not? If your work, your business, or your inventory are all linked to China supply chains, please bring that conversation and that experience to the conversation. Russia and Ukraine have exchanged prisoners, but the war continues to hit civilians. Russia and Ukraine each exchanged 205 prisoners of war. The exchange is being described as the first stage of a larger planned swap. Some of the returned Ukrainian servicemen have reportedly been in captivity since 2022. At the same time, Russian attacks hit Kyiv and other areas with deaths, injuries, and damage to civilian sites, as being reported. So the real question here is both things at once. A humanitarian channel is still open, and civilians are still living under attack. So what do we know so far? Well, we know that both sides have exchanged prisoners, and the exchange may be part of a larger planned process. The prisoner releases can happen while civilians are still sheltering from drones and missiles. Some coverage might cover this as proof that democracy is working, but other coverage might frame it as Russian escalation. What is not confirmed, though, is whether the larger exchange will be completed and whether attacks will ease. Any ceasefire, and the real question at the end of the day is any ceasefire mechanism can hold, much less any sort of resolution or peace between the war. The gap in coverage here, from whichever side you're hearing it from, is that the prisoner swaps can be considered diplomatic scoreboard items. But for families, this is not abstract. This means they might actually have reunions with their families. They might be able to receive medical care or trauma recovery, or simply return one of the bodies instead of survivors. If you're hearing this story from a pro-Ukraine or left-of-center international coverage, you might hear the strike impact and Russian escalation emphasized. That is important, but it can leave less room for the mechanics of prisoner lists, body returns, and family reunification. Whereas if you're hearing this from the right of center or isolationist coverage, you might hear more about whether the U.S. involvement should narrow, and that can distract from the civilian and family level costs unfolding, regardless of diplomatic branding. The concern here is that a diplomatic breakthrough can coexist with daily terror for civilians. Why? Because for those who are returning, the next challenge is medical care, trauma recovery, family reunions, and really trying to rebuild life after years of captivity. For those civilians, the daily cost shows up as sirens, sheltering, and damaged homes. If they've been impacted locally, they might miss school, miss work, not even have power. And that doesn't factor in the mental, emotional, and psychological strain of simply waiting for the next alert. These are human beings, and they're dealing with traumatic scenarios. Now, if the swap continues, families may see more returns even without a full peace deal. Whereas if the strikes escalate, humanitarian diplomacy might be overshadowed by civilian casualties. So how about you? Has your family lived through this war or dealt with any of the service disruptions, or having maybe someone that's in captivity? Do you know of a relative, friend, or family that is there dealing with this? We would appreciate your perspective, your input on these scenarios, because your perspective matters. A Boeing 737 MAX crashed, and the family of some of the victims have won a $49.5 million jury award. A federal jury in Chicago awarded the money to the family of Samaya Stumo. She was 24 years old and was killed in the 2019 Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crash. That crash killed all 157 people on board. It was one of two Boeing 737 MAX crashes that together killed 346 people. Boeing accepted liability in this civil case. So the jury was not deciding whether Boeing was responsible. The jury was simply deciding damages. The award included compensation for pain, suffering, emotional distress, loss of companionship, and family grief. The real public issue is not the verdict amount. It's whether aviation safety systems, corporate incentives, and regulatory oversight changed enough after two crashes that should have never happened. What is confirmed so far is that the jury awarded $49.5 million, and Boeing accepted liability in this civil proceeding. The 737 MAX was grounded worldwide for more than a year after the Ethiopian Airlines crashed. What is not yet confirmed, though, is how remaining civil cases will resolve, whether more trials will happen, and whether all safety reforms are strong enough to prevent similar failures. The coverage in this reporting here is that businesses might focus on Boeing's legal exposure and financial risk, but that really distracts from the ethical question. The question being, did corporate systems value speed, profit, and certification goals over passenger safety, over public safety? Consumer safety coverage might focus on corporate wrongdoing and regulatory failure. That is important. But viewers still need specifics, like which systems have been changed, which warnings are now harder to ignore, and who is accountable when safety depends on process passengers, and who is accountable when safety depends on processes passengers never see. The concern is that aviation failures turn ordinary trust into permanent loss. Passengers board planes assuming that engineering and certification and training have already been prepared. They assume that the oversight has already ensured that their protections are there. For families, accountability is not one court date, not one judgment. It's years of legal travel, documentation review, not to mention the grief and the public testimony and the challenges that come with trying to adapt with life without your family. If they have to go to court and explain all of this, they have to not only provide their testimony, but they would be reliving the final moments of someone else's life. Why? If verdicts continue, public pressure on Boeing and regulators may stay high. If cases settle quietly, the families may receive compensation, but the public may hear less about the evidence behind the failures. This story is a reminder that safety is not abstract. If you work in aviation or engineering or even in compliance, maintenance, or any field where people rely on these invisible systems, we would love to hear your experience and your input, because it belongs in this conversation, really, to help us be able to connect and see how we can help each other. Parents and school districts are clashing over classroom technology. This story is not about whether technology is good or bad. It's about whether schools have built systems around screens faster than parents, teachers, and students can evaluate the consequences. Parents in multiple places are pushing schools to reduce screen time and return more classroom work to pencils, paper, and direct institution. In one Pennsylvania district, more than 600 people signed a petition asking to preserve the ability for parents to opt children out of digital devices during the school day. District officials say large-scale opt-outs are not feasible because technology is now central to the curriculum. At least 14 states have proposed legislation to limit school screen time. Several have already passed laws. Los Angeles Unified School District is planning major limits for young students, daily screen time caps, YouTube restrictions, and audits of education technology contracts. So what do we know so far? Well, we know that Lower Merion, Pennsylvania uses iPads beginning in kindergarten, Chromebooks in second grade, and MacBooks in eighth grade. More than 600 people have signed a petition in Lower Merion seeking to preserve opt-out options. Some districts are considering limits, some parents want opt-out rights altogether, and schools are simply trying to balance institution, equity, privacy, attention, and modern skills. What is not yet confirmed, though, is what will Lower Merion ultimately do with this opt-out policy. It's also unclear which state proposals will pass and how strict new screen time limits will be. So it's not confirmed whether which policies will actually work, and whether schools can actually measure the learning benefits against the distraction and privacy costs. The gap in reporting here is predictable If you're catching this on the right of center sources, you may hear it framed mainly as parents versus school bureaucracy, but that can distract from the classroom implementation problem that teachers are dealing with and facing, especially with their lesson plans or maybe accessibility tools, following up on assignments, and testing. All of this is already digital. If you're catching this report from the left of center sources, you might hear it framed mainly as innovation, equity, and modern learning. But that distracts from the real burden on families, those who have children who struggle with attention or compulsive screen use, or are used to using AI-assisted shortcuts. The concern here is that school technology can become a daily attention and a family management burden. For parents, the consequence may be nightly conflict over a school laptop that opens games, YouTube, messaging, and AI tools. For students, the cost can be lost focus, weaker writing habits, even privacy exposure. The challenge they can also face is staying with hard work as opposed to just opting out with digital prompts. Critical thinking skills, traditional training in analog approach really is a debate that is worth diving into. And we seem to be at a point where this subject could really accelerate and have a long-term impact in a positive way for parents, teachers, and students. But for now, for teachers, the burden boils down to time, trying to enforce device rules on top of following up with their assignments, trying to adjust lessons so that they can work in both analog and digital approaches, monitoring screens, troubleshooting software, and yet still trying to build a human relationship in the room. If districts keep devices central without limits, family pushback might actually grow. If districts impose age-based limits and privacy rules, technology may become more targeted instead of automatic. This is a story where lived experience matters. If screens are helping your child learn, please let us know. And yet, if you appreciate the analog approach and you want to be able to provide an alternative or a traditional way in developing their education, especially at young ages, please share your comments too. Our goal here is to inform and to be able to identify what the local human impact is, and we want to hear your version of that. So please feel free to share. And if you want to contribute to the live conversation while the live broadcast is going, like and subscribe, as well as put the notifications on. And as soon as we go live, you'll be notified. Analog versus digital, schools versus parents. The public conversation needs much more than slogans. It needs you. The National Weather Service is warning about critical fire weather and severe storm risks across parts of central United States. This is impacting public safety, and there is no political framing in this one, but the focus is about risk, timing, and uncertainty, and making sure that you are prepared. The National Weather Service says critical fire weather is expected across parts of northern plains, upper Midwest, and southern high plains. The concern is gusty winds and low humidity. The conditions can help fires start and spread quickly. The Weather Service is also warning that severe thunderstorms capable of large hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes are possible across parts of the Central Plains. What is confirmed is that fire weather risk and severe storm risk are both present. What is not yet confirmed is the exact track, timing, storm length, hail size, tornado development, or where outages and road closures may happen. That means it is important that you not only dial in on the National Weather Service, but especially on your local outlets to be aware of any changes and updates that happen. The national weather headlines may not tell you your local county or your commute window. That's why it's important to dial into your local service. So please, if you're in an affected area and you see the warnings come across, please make sure that you get to safety first. If you know someone who is in those areas and you want to share your concerns or your perspectives on this, please feel free to drop those into the comments below. The action step is simple. Check your local forecast, turn on your alerts, charge up your devices, and have go bags ready to go. This final segment is a sponsorship from the Five Diamond Group Real Estate here in Las Vegas. And while we are a niche group here in Las Vegas, Southern Nevada, we do have a national footprint that we can have access to. So we are available to be able to help folks in any part of the state, the country, make informed decisions, get connected with people who can help them make the right choices. Mortgage rates this week have inched down in Freddie Mac's latest weekly survey. The average 30-year fixed mortgage was 6.3%. That's slightly lower than the previous week and lower than the same time last year. The 15-year fixed mortgage averaged 5.71%. Freddie Mac's chief economist and purchase demand Freddie Mac's chief economist said purchase demand is softening, but still above last year. While existing home sales are modestly edging up, the practical point is this. Weekly averages can look stable, but buyers feel the rate they can actually lock. If bond yields move, daily mortgage quotes can move quickly. For buyers, even a small rate change can affect the monthly payment, their debt-to-income ratio, and whether home still qualifies. For sellers, rate volatility can affect buyer urgency and negotiating power. If inflation and bond yields rise, mortgage quotes may move higher even when weekly averages look calm. If rates hold, or if they drift down, some sideline buyers may re-enter the market and increase the buyer demand, which in translation, if there is low inventory, increases home prices. Now, when it comes to getting an input on your personal situation, everybody is unique. There is no cookie cutter version of buyers, sellers, and transitions. Everyone is unique. And so it is imperative that you speak to a professional for both mortgage and real estate to help you assess your situation. And the goal with any of those conversations is really to get you the right information so that you can make informed decisions that impact your family and your future, as well as your family legacy. If you are forced or coerced into some sort of agreement initially, run. Don't even bother. Reach out to us. We'll be able to help you get connected with proper experts who are more concerned about your decision-making process as opposed to someone's urgency. Our goal here at the Five Diamond Group is to ensure that you get the right information the first time. And that's why real estate with us is refined. Our second report here is regarding real estate litigation, and it continues to see growth when it comes to major companies. For example, litigation continues to keep attention on listing access and market transparency. In Virginia, a federal judge allowed the FTC and state antitrust claims involving Zillow and Redfin to continue past the dismissal stage. Separately, in another lawsuit, Zillow has sued Midwest Real Estate Data and Compass, RED and Compass, alleging that they conspired to hide listings and restrict competition. It sounds like a carbon copy of the NAR class action lawsuit from a couple of years ago. Now, these are all, at this point, allegations. They're not proven facts. But the public interest question here is clear. Who gets access to housing information and who benefits when access is limited? For buyers, renters, sellers, agents, and small brokerages, listing visibility can shape opportunity. So the thing to watch here is whether courts treat this as a routine business dispute or broader fights over housing market transparency. We will keep following these updates as they develop. Thank you for tuning in. That is today's Spectrum. The common thread today is about trust. Trust in medicine access, trust in the legal system, trust in trade stability, trust in aviation safety, trust in schools, trust in alerts, and trust in housing information. The point here is not to tell you what to think. The goal is to give you enough context to ask better questions. For example, who benefits and who pays the costs. Also, consider who's missing from the coverage and what does this mean to us in our daily life. If any one of these stories have affected you directly, I hope that you can have the opportunity to share your experience in the comments and bring it into the live conversation. Like, subscribe, put the notification on, and you'll get notified when I go live to share these comments. And we'd love to be able to create a community that's looking for the same message. We can all help each other and grow together as human beings, as opposed to being divided by politics, perspective, and opinion. That's what we've seen over the last 10 years, and the goal is to be able to bring humanity back. The news becomes more honest when the people living the consequences are a part of the discussion. I'm Jared Urain. This is